Good afternoon. Good morning to those for whom it is still morning. So because we have today a very global participation in this side event on scaling up financing for sustainable urban infrastructure, experiences from the UNECE region. We are very grateful for all the experts who joined us today. We have very many registrations for the side event. Just to remind you that this side event is a joint side event for two events. The UNECE's second Forum of Mayors, which took place on the 4th and 5th of April, and the Regional Forum Sustainable Development, which is ongoing these days here at Palais de Nation in Geneva. So there is a big interest definitely to the financing for stable urban infrastructure. There are many players these days. There is a big need in exchanging experiences and best practices. So this side event is really to look into that, look into experiences of different actors, different organizations. So we really appreciate colleagues sharing their experiences. I would like to give floor to Dmitry Mariasin, who is the Deputy Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, to open this side event. Dmitry, please.
Thank you very much, Gulnara. Mayors, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this side event of the second Forum of Mayors and of the Regional Forum for Sustainable Development, the 2022 edition, both hosted by UNECE. We are focusing on scaling up financing for sustainable urban infrastructure, and would like to look at experiences from our broad UNECE region today. We hope that this is an opportunity for all of us to learn, and for cities specifically, as well as the international financial institutions, UN partners, private sector, and other stakeholders to exchange views on what it would take to start scaling up finance available for not just any development of cities, but low carbon and climate resilient development of cities. Why is it important? We know that cities account for over 70% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. The climate footprint of cities, be it from the point of view of industry or transport or buildings, is enormous. And we also know that concrete solutions exist to reduce that footprint while simultaneously improving the living conditions of the urban populations around the world. It's also very clear that an essential element of this equation, quality of life, climate change, overall sustainability and resilience of cities, is in the infrastructure. It is the construction and maintenance of the required, supporting infrastructure that has not really been able to keep pace with the rapid growth of cities in developed and developing countries alike. We've seen what impact a pandemic can have on urban infrastructure. We saw that it was not really fit in many cities around the world for the challenges presented by a major pandemic like the COVID-19 pandemic, which we're still experiencing today in many parts of the world. Clearly, the sustainability infrastructure is being tested by other major types of crises, be it man-made or natural disasters, be it large flows of refugees and migrants as a result of climate-induced events or as a result of wars. And this is also becoming a reality for our region at big scale right now with the crisis in Ukraine. So our city is ready for this. And is the level of investment in sustainable urban infrastructure adequate to the needs? Our understanding is that the answer is no. There is an estimated annual financing gap of different estimates, point at somewhere around $2 trillion US dollars for low emission and climate resilient infrastructure globally. Most cities lack the resources and skills required to even conceive and prepare, let alone get financing for and implement such massive infrastructure projects. And cities do need this expertise and capacity. Cities need to accelerate in the development of bankable, sustainable, and inclusive infrastructure projects. And we believe that they need to look at their resource envelopes, at their budgets, at their borrowing, at their taxation systems, at public-private partnerships, and other elements of the financing ecosystem to understand what works best for their particular situation, what corresponds to the ambitious agenda of greening the cities and making cities more resilient, and what is the optimal mix of private and public resources. And so what role will the private sector play, in addition to very important role that the international financial institutions, the national financing institutions, and other players already play today. So you're asking maybe why is UNECE suddenly talking about this? Well, we have a long history of working on sustainable urban development in the region. Currently, the project called Smart Sustainable Cities for the 2030 Agenda and the New Urban Agenda, and the project is running until 2023, is helping 5 cities across Central Asia, Caucasus, and the Western Balkans prepare data-driven assessments and sustainable urban infrastructure strategies. I will not go into the details. I'm sure the team will speak about this during today's event, but just to tell you that we have already worked with many of these cities. As one very specific contribution, we have worked to develop smart sustainable city profiles in Nur-Sultan, Kazakhstan, and Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan, and Grodno in Belarus. And we expect that such city profiles will also be ready in Tbilisi, Georgia, and Podgorica, Montenegro by the end of this year. So these are very specific initiatives. We are creating an evidence-based approach for cities to start looking at their infrastructure and eventually start looking at options for financing. Very importantly, in one case in Bishkek, we went a step further, and together with the Cities Development Initiative for Asia, CDIA, and I understand they are with us today online, we have actually worked to prepare a pre-feasibility study for the integrated upgrading of 5 settlements on the outskirts of the city, but densely populated settlements faced with major risks and major constraints to their development. And we hope that as a result of this, Bishkek city will be able to access both financing flows that are aimed at city infrastructure upgrades, but also climate finance. We're linking cities like Bishkek to a global network of project preparation facilities in the city's climate finance leadership alliance. And we hope that with this pre-feasibility study as a pilot, we can then move to scaling phase and to help cities around the region with similar, well thought through, evidence-based approaches to creating bankable projects that ultimately will lead to improved and more resilient and more climate smart urban infrastructure. We have also just completed a mission to Tbilisi, and it's fantastic that today we have with us the deputy mayor of Tbilisi. It's an honor to have you with us. The mission to Tbilisi that gathered the information for the smart sustainable city profile, which we are developing in close collaboration with the Tbilisi City Hall, was very interesting. We were able to examine various elements, both institutional and financing, but also looking at it from the perspective of various stakeholders, and we hope that we will generate useful recommendations for the city. We already heard from Deputy Mayor during the Forum of Mayors earlier this week. I was personally very impressed by his presentation about how changes to infrastructure, how combining smart greening and smart transport solutions may initially lead to, to misunderstandings of the citizens and misperceptions of different stakeholders, but eventually gets a city to a point where there is a win-win for everybody. Higher quality of life, better urban environment, reduced air pollution, faster transit. Some of the figures that the deputy mayor was presenting at the Forum of Mayors are quite impressive. And then ultimately, we hope that examples like this will also be, a way for us to share the knowledge, create more cases for investment in similar bankable projects around the region. And in this sense, I'm very happy that we have now the two concrete examples, Bishkek and Tbilisi, in front of us that we can take guidance from. And we really hope also that we can partner with major European and global partners. Very good to have CDIA, I mentioned already. Very important to have the international financial institutions with us, EIB, the World Bank. I can see that KfW is also online. We're looking forward to working with all of you, as well as with other international organizations, GIZ, important alliances of cities like C40 and other partners in creating an ecosystem that would facilitate higher quality, greener financing for cities, and in supporting the knowledge sharing among cities so that they can learn from each other on how to actually make it work. With this, I'd like to wish us, a good discussion. I'll be with you throughout it, and hope to then say a few words at the end as well. And with this, back to you, Gunnar.
Much, Dmitry. Really appreciate your very inspiring speech. And as you already mentioned, Mr. Basilei's speech. So I think without any delays, I have big pleasure to give you floor for the keynote speech.
Thank you very much, Mr. Merson. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a big honor to be speaking in front of you, and it was very important that the mayors get together on a platform and discuss issues and share first-hand experiences. It's been very helpful, and I really hope that this format remains for the cities. I also want to start by expressing full support for the people of Ukraine and for the partner and sister cities of Tbilisi, which are Kiev, Kharkiv, and Odessa. And we really hope that this war will come to an end, and I think it will be really a global challenge to help Ukraine rebuild the infrastructure and rebuild the cities that were pretty much destroyed. Now, onto the topic at hand. As we know, we're living in the age of urbanization, where about 56 or 55% of the population is currently living in the cities, and this figure is much higher in Europe. And we're headed towards about 75% of people living in the cities by 2050, and this will be closer to 85% in Europe. So the agenda of cities will be very important. It will be increasingly important down the road. Since we're talking about infrastructure, there are some things you just cannot solve within a year or two, even if you have the resources. So it is very important for the cities to really plan out what is important for the city, what projects need to be financed, because there's never enough. There's never enough financing for all the projects, and the cities have to make these tough choices. And of course, you cannot make this choice, or you can make the choice, but it cannot be. You can only be sure in this choice if you have some, if you know where you're going, basically, if you have the plan, if you have the vision, and that's why we focused on few areas in the city that were in need of dire change, and this was, of course, public spaces, green spaces, the transport system. And when we came to the management of the city, we realized that there's no concrete plans in place. So the first thing we did is really, with the big help of our international partners, like the EBRD, like ADB, EIB, basically we were in contact with all international organizations, and with their help, we have managed to really make some systemic changes. We're now working and almost finishing the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, which will be the first of its kind in the region, and we're quite proud of that. and it will outline what city will be doing in the next 10, 15 years in order to accommodate the needs of the city. And the needs of the city are quite, I think, dramatic in terms of, for example, transport changes, because we have about 600,000 registered vehicles in Tbilisi, and this number is growing by 7% each year, which automatically means that we cannot build enough roads or overpasses to accommodate. So, of course, this decision was made that we need to shift our focus from old conventional street design towards the new approach, which really focuses on sustainability and which really focuses on public transportation, wider sidewalks, really bike lanes and things like this that make the mobility feasible in the long run, because there's no alternative, basically, that we came to. There's no alternative to making these tough choices. And 2 days ago, when I made the presentation, it was about a pilot project we did on one of the main avenues, and it was a really very important experience for us. And as I mentioned, and as was mentioned by Mr. Mariasin, the initial public response was very drastic. People were quite angry because these changes require the change of behavior, which is always very tough. People don't want to change the way they live. They don't want to change the way they get to work. But unfortunately, you have to make these changes, and you have to really try to explain in the short run why it's important, because not everybody sees the big picture, not everybody thinks in the long run. It's been very, very important. Another area that we really focused on has been the green spaces and the amount of financing that we allocate towards these projects. And in the last 4 years, we've spent about 3 times more than was spent in previous 10 years. And we've committed twice the amount for the next 4 years, and we will be building and rehabilitating 15 parks. And basically, the effect has been extremely positive on this side, because as opposed to transport system, everybody enjoys going to parks. Everybody enjoys seeing more green spaces. And of course, air pollution is also a big issue in the city, and dust pollution as well. And of course, the parks, the green spaces are very important in this. And we haven't just looked at the parks. We have on the project like the Chavchavadze Avenue I mentioned, we have tried to maximally utilize all the space we have to really insert as much greenery as possible. And if we count only the urban spaces, it's been about, we've planted about 60 hectares of urban greenery, and this is in between streets, on the sidewalks. It's not the traditional parks or squares, but because there hasn't been that much done in this area, the decision was made that it's very important to make the systemic change. And now, by the decision of the mayor, each rehabilitation project that we need to do on, for example, street rehabilitation or some road work that we do must be done according to this new system. So basically, projects now take much longer. They are much harder to finance because they cost more, but the effect is really dramatic, and people are really noticing this as citizens of Tbilisi. So it's really been a sort of reinforcement, a positive reinforcement of our decisions. And we've, of course, committed to continuing these efforts. Of course, if we look at how can cities raise more finances? How can cities really able to once you have decide where you're going, you need the finances to get there. And we have tried to use really every possible opportunity that the city has. We are in a bit of a unique position because Tbilisi is roughly 50% of GDP of Georgia. So we get a lot of help for important infrastructure projects from the central government. But as the COVID hit, of course, the central government told us, look, there's very important issues that we need to shift the financing towards the COVID relief, which meant that the city lost about $50 million worth of investment for the project. So, and at the same time, the country of Georgia is facing a borrowing cap. So we really, all of a sudden, we're extremely limited in what we can do, and the projects that we're working on, very important projects like 70 million project of cable cars. There would be installed the 2 cable car routes that will be installed in Tbilisi. So we had to really think how can we, what can we do now with this limitation? What's really the most important project that we can tackle? And it's been very helpful as well that we've engaged with UNECE on the smart city profile, and we really hope that this will again help Tbilisi to really focus on what's important, where we're going, and of course help us finance our needs and finance where we're going. So I guess to summarize what I've been saying is that it's very important to know where the cities are going. It's very important to have this clear vision, like the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, like the systemic changes we've made to street design, but then of course you need the capacity and the financing to get there. So it's a bit of a balance, but I think that with the right effort, the cities can get there, because a lot of the international financial organizations are very willing to help, and it's very important for the cities to have the institutional capacity to really tackle these projects, manage these projects, because it's much tougher to manage an international project than just a grant from the central government that will be credited to our budget. So it's very important that we focus on the sustainability. We focus on what's really important in the long run, and not just look at the short picture, because mayors in Tbilisi are elected for 4 years, and you cannot just think in this 4-year period, or despite the political pressure to deliver results. You need to think in the long term, and I think it's very important that these long-term plans are in place, and I'm very confident that we will be able to get most of the financing that we require, because we have this long-term vision. And if we didn't have this vision, if we didn't have this plans in place, I think we would be very much limited in terms of the financing available to us throughout the international channels. So thank you again for this opportunity. We'll be very happy to participate in such events in the future as well, and I'll be very eager to hear the discussion today on what other ways we can really tackle these issues in our city. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you for your inspiring speech, and I think there's many lessons that cities and other stakeholders can learn and share today. It is for this reason that we decided to focus session 1 on project preparation facilities. You've mentioned all the work that you've been doing with international development banks and other partners. And I think in the last years, facilities like the ones that we've invited have done a great job in also helping cities to prioritize what you said about the importance of this, and in finding different ways to finance priority projects. Because as you rightfully said, there's never enough financing to do everything that we need to do. So it's important to understand what we have and then go forward with those. So this first session is really focusing on giving project preparation facilities the space to share their approaches and their success stories of working with cities. So we will have in this session Lara Arian, who is a project officer at the Cities Development Initiative for Asia. We're working with CDIA as part of the UNDA 12th Tranche project, both in Bishkek, and they also worked in Tbilisi on upgrading the metro system. After Lara, we will have Giulia Macagno, head of the City Climate Finance Gap Fund. And following that, we will have Lucas Prince, advisor at Felicity II, managed by GIZ and EIB. And finally, we will have Max Lohman, organizational development and donor relations at C40 Cities Finance Facility. So I'd like now to give the floor to Lara Arian. We have the presentation up for you. Lara, thank you very much for joining. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. For myself, I'm from Manila, so I'm about, it's 8:30 p.m. here, and good afternoon to everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here in this forum, and my name is Lara Arjan, and I am an urban development specialist at ADB. And ADB's relationship with CDIA is that ADB manages CDIA on behalf of the donors. So CDIA is a multi-million-dollar trust fund and has been established since, it's established as a trust fund since 2018, but has been established as technical assistance between ADB and GIZ since 2007. So in terms of project preparation facilities, it's one of the first ones that were in existence. Could you please turn to next page? Thank you. And we work mainly with secondary cities, and we finance grants for the project preparation studies. And we have so far leveraged $12.2 billion in investments. We've mobilized, we've worked in 127 cities in 22 countries. And we have conducted 113 PPSs, or project preparation studies. These are studies that go up to sometimes feasibility or pre-feasibility study. Next slide, please. So these are the countries, and as you can see, we have started to work a little bit in the region of the Caucasus and Central Asia, or Central West Asia, as we call it at ADB. And we really want to be able to expand more there. Our concentration has been in Southeast Asia and South Asia and East Asia over the years for historic reasons, but now more and more we want to be expanding. Currently, we do have projects in Armenia and Georgia, and we just conducted a project in Uzbekistan last year. Next slide, please. So we do projects by sector. So we cover almost all sectors with predominance of the water, wastewater, and drainage, and urban transport. Next slide, please. So as my colleagues were talking about finances, the whole philosophy behind project preparation facilities such as CDIA and the others is that we believe that there is enough money out there. The problem is that there is a lack of investable projects or bankable projects to be prepared. I mean, this piece of project, this kind of phase of project preparation doesn't cost a lot. $500,000 maximum for us at CDIA. But the issue is that there is a lack, nobody wants to pay it. The downstream funders don't want to pay it. The upstream funders, the upstream studies don't want to pay that. So you end up with a gap because we're not able to link these great project ideas that come out from studies to funders. And this is kind of CDIA's raison d'etre. It was like, we do these studies, they're very punctual studies, on time, very scoped studies, where we help cities scope out their big ideas and make them into reality by A, studying their feasibility, writing them up as an investable project, assessing the risks, and then linking them to downstream funders, whether those be the private sector, national government, or other MDBs. And the beauty of CDIA is that we are agnostic to whom the downstream funder is. So it can be another MDB, it can be a regional bank, it can be the private sector. we do not necessarily care. The essential part is that we bridge that gap. Now, what we do is we ensure bankability, but also there are other challenges with cities. So I would say the challenges the cities face are in three areas. The first area is their enabling environment for them to take charge of their finances. So in many countries, there's a lot of downloading from central government to local government, we see, but they don't give them any of the money. So they decentralize, they give them more responsibilities, but they do not give them the fiscal transfers. And they do not allow them to take charge of their revenues. And this is a major challenge because a lot of the cities we work with are not credit worthy or do not have the necessary capacity, whether it be legislative or their own actual capacity to manage their finances and to gather all the revenue they can. So we need organizations like UNECE to work on that enabling environment and to work with national and central governments on that environment. The other challenge we face is that the cities themselves don't have the capacity to build these sort of investable projects and bankable projects that would lead to climate resilience investment. So although I went through the sectors, the cross-cutting theme at CDIA is resilience, whether it be adaptation or mitigation. And that is a bit of issue because they can't not only hire the people that they need or the expertise, and they can't even retain them at some times. So we come in and we help the cities build their capacity. Tbilisi, for instance, with the I guess the Transport Commission, we were able to put somebody to hire an expert who stayed for over a year in Georgia, even during the pandemic, to sort of have this day-to-day contact and mentor people. So this capacity development aspect is very, very important, be it on the subject matter, because sometimes some countries are still starting to think about things like mobility and other issues, but also in terms of project management. And then the third challenge they face is also transparency and managing their finances. And that attracts funders. So CDIA, in the span of 8 months, tries its best to do a study and build capacity and link to funders. Next slide, please. We can skip one. This one. Thank you. Maybe next slide. Thanks. So our new strategy has 3 pillars. One is building capacity, 3, networking with organizations that work upstream in order to work on the enabling environment, because that's not where CDIA works. That's not our wheelhouse, that's not our forte. But we do work with organizations such as UNECE to sort of work on that enabling environment, or take the studies they do or their recommendations to help cities scope out projects. Once they scope out the projects, the ones they choose, we do feasibility studies and link them to financing. And in terms of financing, we're looking more at combined blended financing right now. Most of our previous work was mainly on the non-sovereign part, the sovereign part. Now we're looking more at sovereign part, whether it be private sector financing or public-private partnerships. Next slide, please. So Georgia, Tbilisi Metro upgrade. So we did work on the metro, whereby CDIA worked on developing an investment program to improve the operation of the metro system by sort of looking at their technical, operational, safety and accessibility standards. And later on, we linked that to about 15 million ADB investment, and that helped Tbilisi renew the power cables and the ventilators that were rehabilitated, and it made the daily commute safer. The other example I want to give, next slide please, is in Uzbekistan, where we worked on urban renewal, where we worked on solid waste management, water supply and sanitation in 3 cities, Khiva, Jizak and Yanggir, Havash. And this was a $650,000 project preparatory study but we link that to a 100 million investment value by ADB. The project is still ongoing. And the third project was already mentioned here, and that's the project that we're working on Bishkek right now with UNECE on. Well, UNECE did a study in 5 peri-urban settlements that are extremely crowded and came up with a plan for those cities to become more livable, more resilient. And what CDIA is doing right now is that we're going to take those and look at the infrastructure components of those plans and do the feasibility study for these 5 settlements. So this is a good example where an upstream or an organization that is focused upstream just hands over the ideas of the projects for CDIA to help scope out, to help study the feasibility. And once we do that, we link that to downstream funding. So we're kind of the missing link. We're kind of a little bit midstream, not very upstream and not downstream, of course, because downstream is more the loan that will make it happen or the private-public partnership. So what we do is we study and we make these projects attractive to investors. In other words, we make them bankable or investable. So I will close now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lara, for your intervention. And I think it's really clear from your speech how cities and development finance institutions find themselves sometimes distant, which is the reason why there is this financing gap that cities face. So exactly on this is the title of the next project preparation facility, the City Climate Finance Gap Fund. So I would like to let Giulia Macagno from the Gap Fund to tell us more about this gap and the projects that they're doing. Giulia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm Giulia Macagno. I work at the European Investment Bank, where I am responsible for coordinating the activities of the City Climate Finance Gap Fund. Although the Gap Fund is, as you may know, a joint initiative. So today I will be talking about the Gap Fund on behalf of the EIB and the World Bank as well, as we work in very close partnership. So if you can go to the next slide, please. I will not dwell too long on this because Lara did already an amazing job in showing the gap that is faced by cities and local authorities. What I will just say is that we all know that the climate investment needs in terms of developing low carbon and resilient urban infrastructure are very, very large. And we also know that MDBs, but also government and private actors are increasing their climate commitments. What lies in between is a gap that Lara was explaining before. Indeed, the fact that there is money and there is needs, but investors don't find necessarily investment-ready projects, and a lot of good ideas that the cities have do not make it to a proper project. So hence the role of project preparation facilities is crucial to help really bridge this gap, and this is what the Gap Fund is about. Next slide, please. So the Gap Fund focuses on the early stages of the project preparation cycle, meaning that we could provide support for upstream and up to pre-feasibility stage project preparation and studies, because we recognize that this is where the major gap indeed is. The Gap Fund could provide support in in helping the cities developing their strategies, developing investment programs, or prioritizing interventions that they may already have identified. But also, once they have identified an idea, the GAP Fund can provide support in developing a project concept and contributing to pre-feasibility studies. So like Lara said in the CDIA, also the GAP Fund focuses on very scoped and very precise interventions. I will give a couple of examples later on in the presentation. The scope of the intervention of the GAP Fund is defined together with the cities when we start engaging with them, and when we start discussing what the needs really are and what has already been done, in order not to duplicate and really focus the support on things that cannot be done by anybody else, or and basically studies that would, if not done, would block the development of the project and hinder its implementation. Next slide, please. So we have a fairly broad geographical scope. So all countries that are in the OECD DAC list, so low and middle income countries, are eligible for the GAP Fund. The GAP Fund covers both climate mitigation and adaptation. A very important element in terms of eligibility for us is the ownership at the local level. So as you know, the engagement and the commitment of the city officials is crucial for any project to actually materialize. So we really check that this ownership is there. And then, of course, in addition to the climate dimension, there is the urban dimension. So the project must be located in an urban area or functionally linked to an urban area. Just very quickly, as an example, let's say a recycling facility that is located outside the city boundaries, but it serves a specific city or a couple of cities, would qualify as urban, whereas a renewable energy plant that is located also slightly outside the city boundaries, but produces electricity that feeds into the grid, would not be considered as urban. So this is how we sort of make the difference in terms of the functional link to urban areas. And then the stage, as I was saying before, we focus on the early stages of project planning and preparation up to pre-feasibility stage. In terms of sectors, the GAP Fund has a fairly wide definition of sectors, exactly because we cover both mitigation and adaptation. So we are open to consider proposals in the energy efficiency, small renewable energy, of course, if they're urban, solid waste management, water and wastewater management, also greening of urban areas and the use of nature-based solutions, green buildings, affordable housing with energy efficiency approach, but also potentially multi-sector and area-based investment programs, of course, with a clear climate focus. So each proposal is, of course, analyzed on a case-by-case basis. So we really try to engage with the applicant to see how best the GAP Fund can provide support. We have a dedicated website, citygapfund.org, and also on the website you can find the expression of interest form that we request all applicants to fill in, and in order to then enter basically the screening process of the GAP Fund. If we can go to the next slide, please. So here I put only two examples in the UNECE region. They're both from the Western Balkans. The one in Pristina, Kosovo, is carried out currently by the World Bank, and it refers to the assessment of low carbon and resilient development plans. So the technical assistance provides support in defining a baseline for Pristina's carbon footprint, the development of various GHG emission scenarios based on the existing plans. Also, the identification of alternative scenarios in order to achieve climate targets, an assessment of a neighborhood development plan and the proposal for low carbon development options, and also the identification and early stage preparation of investment in pilot areas. The other example is in Podgorica, Montenegro. We are about to start this assignment. So it will be tendered out hopefully very shortly. And the idea is basically to assess the potential for using green roofs and facades on public buildings, and also opening up impermeable and sealed surfaces in public areas. So Podgorica has developed a climate adaptation strategy in which green buildings and green roofs in particular are considered as one of the key measures. So the idea would be, with this technical assistance, to help them identify a few buildings that could be used as pilots, and provide them with a pre-feasibility analysis on including high-level estimate of the investment and maintenance cost, the risks, expected benefits in terms of energy efficiency, cost savings, and of course climate change mitigation and adaptation, so that this could constitute a good basis for the city to then go on and develop a proper project on this topic. Next slide, please. So in terms of the challenges, I think a lot of them, the challenges that cities face in implementing sustainable infrastructure projects, I think a lot of these challenges have been mentioned already in the previous interventions. I just wanted to point out a few that we are really seeing when developing the GAP Fund projects. On the one hand, indeed, the regulatory framework, the fact that it may be insufficiently developed or uncertain or changing or requiring significant reform. And this would be at the national level, but of course the cities are sort of impacted by this. Another important point, as I was mentioning before, is the lack of political support for a project or changing political priorities. And this can happen both at the local and at the national level. And of course, it slows down the whole process, or can even derail it in some cases. Another point perhaps related to this is the fact that there needs to be sufficient alignment with national strategic objectives, and sometimes this link is not clear, so it is more difficult for the city to have their project let's say recognized as a priority project at the national level. And of course, we know, at least from the EIB perspective, we see that without national level guarantee or support, it is very difficult for IFIs to finance projects at the subnational level. Then there is an issue with scale of the project. Some projects are fairly limited in scale, especially if they are pilots, and this makes it difficult to attract investors. Then I think somebody already mentioned the issue of creditworthiness and debt capacity, but also there are sometimes, very often actually, regulatory hinders to fiscal autonomy. So it is very difficult for cities and local authorities to access financing. And then finally, I wanted to mention the in-house capacity for planning, project preparation, implementation, and monitoring. And this is where project preparation facilities can really help cities develop their projects. Final slide, I have just a few thoughts on the role that UNECE can play. I think UNECE is already playing an incredible role in developing knowledge and sharing knowledge. I think a role in facilitating exchanges and synergies among existing PPFs could be very important in order to facilitate both our life, but also in particularly the life of the city in navigating a system that can be otherwise quite complex, and also potentially provide support to cities and local authorities and also national governments to apply to project preparation facilities, because sometimes at the level of the city, if there is not sufficient in-house capacity, this could be a blocking point. And of course, keep up the work indeed to sharing success stories and lessons learned. I think this is very important. And I was really happy to hear the experience of the city of Tbilisi. But indeed, this occasions where cities come together and speak to each other are particularly relevant and very much beneficial for other cities, as well as it gives ideas and also hope that things can be done and are being done in very effectively in some cities. So that's all I have to say. I look forward to the discussion afterwards. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. It's a pleasure to hear what the GAP Fund is doing, and also thanks for highlighting really this big need to work at the early stages of project preparation, which is an area where cities are particularly struggling to prioritize and get projects off the ground and onto the next stages. With this, I would like to invite Lucas Prinz, advisor at Felicity II, to tell us about the experience of this new project preparation facility in a region that is very much working aligned with the UNECE. So Lucas, thanks for being here. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Tommaso, and hello, everybody. I'm Lucas and working at Felicity II. That's the newest addition to this family of project preparation facilities. I think I can fully subscribe to everything that was said so far in terms of challenges and also the whole approaches that we've developed so far. I think Felicity II is also coming from this family of project preparations facilities that face those challenges and address those barriers at different stages, and I'll come to that in a minute. But I think it's very important to have the community that's present today, and happy to have that engage with UNECE to really drive that forward. Now, Felicity II, Felicity stands for Financing Energy for Low Carbon Investment Cities Advisory Facility, so we use Felicity for short, is an integrated approach funded by the German government between the European Investment Bank and GIZ as an implementing agency to really drive the need of cities for finance up until the stage of bankable projects. So we can give a short overview of what we've achieved over the last years on the next slide, please. That there is, so Felicity is intended since 2017 as a global facility, and we've had quite some impact with about 300 million leveraged and about 2 million CO2 tons of CO2 equivalents reduced on our projects that we're working with. So it's essentially 500,000 cars off the streets globally, and we have more than 5,000 professionals trained on building capacity. Felicity II, now you see small here on the map, is starting this year to address the countries in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and it extended in particular to that region. So we can go to the next slide and look at what we do, and I'll come to the things we intend to do in the Eastern Europe part soon. So we've heard from the GAP Fund and also CDIA on that early stage project preparation up until the financing stage. Felicity is also intended in that way. You see here where GIZ and EIB come in, basically at the stage between project design and feasibility and the linking to finance, because we are an integrated approach with the EIB together. But we also add on the GAP Fund and similar initiatives and everything that UNECE might be able to do with a multi-level approach that's really targeted on action. So we're a climate change initiative. You know about the needs better in your cities as well, that there is a really deep need for financing and getting projects off the ground. And that's what we do with a targeted instrument, where there's a couple of lessons learned that I would briefly touch upon, because in order to support cities in the best way to really implement their ambitions, for example, like mentioned by Tbilisi as well, and the projects that you had in mind, it's also important to make sure that cities dedicate the necessary resources in terms of their staffing for capacity building to really work. And I think that's mostly a commitment decision, and Julia referred to that as well. So I think once the city commits to that and applies to something like the Gap Fund or Felicity, it's very important to match that support. And that's where we are going up until you see that small crane here, the implementation stage and really getting projects off the ground. Now let's turn to Eastern Europe on the last slide, where we're just starting really the commissioning, and we're have operations in Ukraine, which is obviously on hold due to the war at this stage, but we're committed to go there as soon as it's possible. But we'll also address Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Georgia by addressing really key sectors, energy efficient buildings and water and wastewater projects, to both have a sector reform, so the more upstream part, but then going all the way to having a project pipeline and the pot of money available to address that in the next 4 years, and having a pot of money available for cities to go through. So that's where we're working on the national level, but also going down and working with committed cities in those areas. As I said before, we were working together with GIZ and EIB. GIZ is in country, and EIB providing the long-term financing. And I think that's also a lesson learned that could be picked up by UNECE so far, because these pots of monies, we've heard about the fiscal challenges, and that's certainly true. There needs to be pots of monies that cities can access, and I think that's often on the national level where UNECE can give cities a voice and compile your network to really make that case on a country basis, but also on the international agenda. To address both the fiscal deficit problem, but also the need for solutions to actually for cities to do their jobs. And the second part, the knowledge sharing, I think there's lots of interlinkages, and we'll hear from the CCFLA later today. So I'll leave it here. Open to engage further with many of you in the future. And thank you very much for having me today.
Thanks a lot, Lucas. That's really great work you're doing. Now we will go to the next speaker, Max Lohmann from C40CFF. Max, I'll have to ask you to be brief, as we are a bit late in our timeline. But yes, thanks for joining us, and yeah, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thanks, Tommaso. I'll try to be as brief as possible. Really good to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to speak to all of the cities and city representatives assembled in the room. It's also really great to see all the colleagues that have preceded me presenting today. It's sort of seeing the evolution of in the field with CDIA as kind of the first kid on the block, and the Gap Fund as the most recent addition to the field, and UNECE thinking about engaging in this area as well is really inspiring, and I think a testament to the kind of demand in the field. So so it's really good to see this kind of crowding up field there. One comment in this context, I've seen that Priscilla Negiris from the CCFLA is also in the audience, and there is obviously a lot of coordination going on between all of these actors, right? And a lot of the things that we do are similar, but tackle different elements, different parts of the project preparation cycle. I think that's one important nuance that sometimes gets lost, right? Especially when all of us are speaking in the same slot as today. So very briefly, also from my side, on the next slide, an intro of what we do. So the C40 Cities Finance Facility, in short CFF, is a project preparation facility that supports cities in accessing finance to realize their ambitious climate action projects with a view to reducing their GHG emissions and adapt to the impacts of a changing climate. We work with C40 and non-C40 cities across Asia, Africa, and Latin America in the sectors of mobility adaptation, mostly with a water management focus, energy, and waste. So far, we've worked with 20 projects in 18 cities, and with our support, managed to leverage about $650 million with our projects, which are projected to avoid up to 2.5 tons of CO2 emissions by 2050. We're funded by, gratefully funded by Germany, France, and the UK, and we're implemented by GIZ, where I sit together with the C40 Cities network. On the next slide, there's a short overview of our support model. And on the left side, you can see our principles of operations. We're demand driven, so cities apply for support to us. We are finance agnostic, which means that we are looking to all the angles of finance available. We're not affiliated with the financial institution. We fund strategic climate action, look for sustainability and ownership. This has been mentioned by others as well. Working towards a catalytic nature, enabling transformation, and very important, we always have an equity and inclusion angle. In the interest of time, we have a similar model as the others. We work with an in-city advisor in our partner cities through capacity development, knowledge sharing, partnership building, technical assistance. We can move on to the next slide, where I've tried to set up a brief overview of our portfolio, just for reference as well. You see that it spans from South Africa to Senegal to the Philippines, Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, Ecuador. Again, this is a little bit of orientation. Because we don't work in Eastern Europe, I thought my contribution could be a little bit sharing the experiences we have had from working with cities over the past 7 years, and highlighting a few of the lessons that we generated from the kind of finance solutions we identified with cities. On the next slide, you see the first one of those, which is that when conceptualizing a project, we found that often cities start to think about the technical details and scope and so on, which is obviously a priority. However, what's often left in the early stages of project preparation is the consideration of what kind of financial options are available, both from the side of what is possible in the city with a credit rating and so on, but also what does the context allow in terms of development banks available, in terms of national funding instruments available, in terms of private partners available. So one key success criteria that we see across the board in all of our projects is that a successful link to finance is much, much higher if the city, as kind of step 2 in the project preparation process, scopes the options, even on a very rough level, scopes the options out that it has available in terms of financing its projects, right? A lot of clues can come from kind of a first, if it is a superficial scoping exercise, and really guide the project preparation process in certain directions. Whereas often, if this is picked up too late, many decisions have been made in the technical element, the technical stages of the phase that sometimes preclude certain financing options. And you see here our intervention process tackles, after the setting up the preparation and getting started, tackles the financial viability very quickly, and then integrates that question through the business case, the link to finance, into a continued strategy for project implementation. Lesson number 1. Lesson number 2. On the next slide, you see from our previous cooperations with cities, a rough distribution of the kinds of financing solutions we realized. The first pie chart on the left here shows our overall scope of financing solutions. So roughly half of projects were funded through nationally allocated finance. Roughly a third, that's the yellow portion, was funded through private investors, and the light green bar is city-owned finance. And you can see that on the side of the private finance, which is the yellow pie chart on the right side, most are, and that's the 80% section there, most are public-private partnership solutions. What we learned from this is that the business case that we develop with cities as part of project preparation oftentimes makes sense to private investors, but, and that's a super important lesson, the business case often also enables the city to finance a project through its own city budget. We've had many situations where the city was planning to go with the public-private partnership, risk sharing being a clear advantage there. But in the end, in the negotiations with private partners, realized that that the margin, the profit margin that the private partner requires is actually a cost that the city does not need to bear, and based on the business case can finance the project itself. So that's something that to us also at times was a surprise. And lesson number 3, and this is one that I've seen in the other presentations as well. This picture here with the city on the one side and the money on the other side, and our support elements in the middle. A lesson we learned in the context of this idea, right? This gap that we all addressed, is that the deficiency or the problem, the challenges are not only on the city side. Naturally, there are capacity gaps and so on city sides that cities need to work on, and that we try and help address them. But there is also a need on the side of the financing institutions to think about cities as clients, right? We see this happening already with, I mean, Felicity with EIB is a great example. The ABADB obviously with CDIA as well. In our work, we often talk to national development banks who are interested in trying to understand and learn better what cities' requirements and needs are. So the arrow that's down here, the turquoise arrow there, very much goes both ways, right? It's not. This is definitely not a one-way street. I think that's a super important final lesson. And with that, I thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to the discussion as well.
Thank you, Max. That's very interesting, and I very much appreciate also how you, Julia, Lucas, Lara, really taking this as a community, and thanks also for reminding the super important role that Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance is playing, and actually it is thanks to them that we're here today, because it's really thanks to their work in bringing us together, in making us understand where we can collaborate, that we are here. So as we are running a bit out of time, now we move into session 2, and we had originally planned to have 3 discussion questions. We will cap that to 2, so hopefully we still have some time for discussion later. So for this discussion, we will have Piero Pellizzaro, Chief Resilience Officer in the city of Milan. Then we will have Jens Hagen, Head of Vision for KfW, Urban Development, Eastern Europe, Caucasus, and Central Asia. We will have Sasulan Kenzegaliev, Executive Director at Astana Innovations. We will have Priscilla Negreiros, Manager at CCFLA, Katia Schäfer, Advisor at UN Habitat, and Raul Garcia Rodriguez, Director, Risk Advisory Department at Deloitte. So also reflecting on what our partners from PPFs have said in this first session, I want to ask first, Piero, from your perspective, perhaps, what practical steps can cities take to scale up in the preparation of inclusive urban infrastructure projects?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon all. Cities are at this time is quite a critical time. We got through the pandemic, we got the climate crisis, and we got now the war time, and with all migrants coming for the floor. So speaking about urban inclusive infrastructures at this stage, it's a challenging. But in terms of financing, we got a lot of support from the European Union, European funding to scaling. But it's also maybe time to review. That is something that is important for cities, to review some regulation that comes from Brussels, at least in Europe for us, when there is some limitation in terms of capacity, also to look in the long term with the financial tools. This meaning also with the bond and all the other blending finance that is necessary for cities. We have too much restriction at the moment, when the challenging are bigger than the financial rules that are imposing or limited the city action, if we want to look in the long term. Because in the shorter term, then it's also important to see that inclusive, it's also how is the relation with the private, especially when the public makes an intervention, makes value out in the public space, and the private capture the value of this investment with maybe an increase of the price of renting or the selling the flats. So that is also something that there will be some new rules that the city should take in now to contain or to allow for affordable housing. That will be the real challenge in the next few years in this sense.
Thanks a lot, Piero. It's always great to hear from you, and I think also your very position as a resilience officer, I think, can be an inspiration for many of the cities that joined us at the Forum of Mayors. So I look forward to discussing more with you further. So moving to another perspective, that of a development bank, Jens, perhaps you can share a little bit on, from your perspective, what steps cities can take in scaling up and in closing this gap that we've been discussing today.
Yeah, sure, certainly. And thanks, first of all, for inviting a representative from KfW to this event. It's much appreciated. It sort of gives the opportunity to exchange in times, with a lot of activity, not least due to Ukraine. Mr. Basilaya already mentioned it. Well, Mr. Basilaya also said that, there's never enough money for projects, whereas Lara Aryan mentioned, there is actually enough money. I would put myself into the middle ground and say, of course, there's never enough money to actually cater for the needs, but at the same time, I would say that the real short-term bottleneck is ready-made projects. So in a way, I think both have their point. And from a lender perspective, my focus is this short-term bottleneck of not sufficiently ready-made projects. And I think what cities, in my view at least, can do about it really is to make sure they have sufficient capacities in-house. Yeah, because whatever support you get from outside, from all the great project preparation facilities that have presented here today, which are great, at some point, it has to go through the city administrations. And so capacity on a technical side, also on a project management side, and then also when it comes to decision making is really critical. And we experience in our urban project that this is often a bottleneck where things get delayed. And of course, this is easier said than done. So I'm also very curious to hear from other panelists, perhaps, how cities can actually achieve this. But I think first it's important to address the point. And I also mentioned this because I think, in terms of public funding, all projects in the urban area also compete with other subsectors. Yeah. And I think, at least from my perspective, urban projects tend to be slower projects, more complicated, smaller scale projects. So by, speeding up preparation, but also implementation, I think cities can definitely attract much more capital, which often goes to other sectors that can disperse quicker. So that's perhaps a specific financier's perspective, and I'll end here, mindful of time. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jens. I think you touched upon a very critical point, the fact that at some point cities will need to dedicate the right capacity and build the right capacity at the city level to deal with their projects and coordinate. We have here as an ex-panelist actually a good example of that, of what the city of Nur Sultan has done, creating Astana Innovations, Zasulan Kentgaliev. So perhaps you can tell us about what practical steps Astana Innovations has taken to help the city preparing projects and ensuring that the link with financing can be established. Zasulan.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to speak today. My name is Jaslan, a representative of Astana Innovation, a company responsible for implementation of new technologies and innovations in Nur-Sultan, the capital of cluster. So Nur-Sultan city is a dynamic city that has made considerable progress towards smart and sustainable development. And we're working on the implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development over the recent decades. So built on this step, our city has experienced rapid population and economic growth, which was driven by the industries and construction boom. Our city has become as a testing or a pilot ground for developing and implementing innovative solutions and technologies. We have set up ambitious goals to deliver smart and sustainable urban development. Recently, with the help of UNECE, we have finished drafting the smart city profile of Nur-Sultan, and we used the methodology of the UNECE and the ITU by the 92 smart city indicators, and we found our good positions of Nur-Sultan and our in the places or spheres of economy where we should ensure sustainability. So with the use of this profile, we have started to draft a new approach how our city will achieve sustainability. Now we're developing sustainable and digital program of Nur-Sultan, which will support implementation of recommendation which UNECE gave us and reach our own strategic goals. The key performance indicators provided us a guidance that includes new approach for urban policies, programs and projects, and new approach for building partnerships which will ensure sustainability. So the sustainable development of Nur-Sultan requires both mobilization of financial resources for the development and the strengthening of financial system, including public finance management. So our government, as well as our mayor's office, are working towards harmonization of strategic and budgetary planning with a view to delivering urban investments more efficiently. So we made steps to improve the efficiency of public debt management, and improve inter-budgetary relations, and expand tools for approaches for public-private partnership. So besides that, our city succeeded in the delivery of public-private partnership in relation to social inclusion and infrastructure development projects, such for the building kindergartens, advanced training schools, and medical centers. And also we work to keep attractiveness of to the investors and consistently strengthen our competitiveness to benefit from foreign direct investments. So our program for digital and sustainable city, it will include an action plan for 5 up to 6 years, which will help us to use all the new technologies to achieve sustainability in the planning, in the business, in the economy, and all the spheres of the city.
Sorry to interrupt. I have to cut you, unfortunately, because we need.
Yes, sorry for that.
Yes, but thanks a lot for sharing your experience and also highlighting the importance of establishing long-term plans, which make it easier for cities to then prioritize projects. Perhaps switching questions now with the last speakers, I wanted to ask to Priscilla from CCFLA, what has been the influence of the COVID-19 pandemic and other natural and anthropogenic disaster on the infrastructure financing gap? So how are cities today positioned to deliver compared to a few years ago, and perhaps just reflecting a bit on also the CCFLA's experience on what cities can do. Priscilla.
Great, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. That's good that you actually changed the question, because the other one I was going to answer something very similar to the previous speakers, which is great. So we agree actually that we need more bankable projects and we need to actually identify project preparation facilities. But going straight to the COVID-19, I think it's like clear for all of us and even more for the cities that cities have been hit hard by the pandemic. They were facing challenges already before to actually have access to public and private finance. And we know that according to the UN, 90% of the reported cases of COVID were in urban areas. And we had like the cities needing to completely change their fiscal and budgetary plans because of the big impacts that COVID-19 had. So the pandemic, it was actually for us, and that's how we were seeing, is a wake-up call that cities need to be prepared for the climate crisis. We need to, COVID-19, the negative effects to climate change will lead to catastrophic consequences. So now we see more and more the needs the cities to be actually ready for it. So we have a couple of challenges that were exacerbated, I think, by COVID. First, I think in the municipal budgets and the fact and the big question of creditworthiness. I think we have touched base on this throughout this event in different ways. So a lot of cities to have access not only to private but also to public funding need to be creditworthiness, and the budgets and the crisis that has arrived through COVID-19 has give some challenges on that front. Also on the need, we see definitely after the COVID-19, this need to increase project preparation and investor-ready projects. So city need more than ever to diversify their funding sources, as a lot of their own resources is dealing with some other problems. So like the fact that the cities can have this support is more urgent than ever. And I think my last point will be on the challenge. This challenge is also an opportunity, as always, depending on the focus we give. So the COVID pandemic has shown how we need to work fast together, have the sense of urgency and a collective reaction. I think we are definitely seeing now with the Ukraine crisis and all the debate around energy security. So we need to be able to move fast. Cities need to have access to this funding. So like using some of this lesson to tackle the climate crisis. So thanks.
Thanks a lot, Priscilla, for your quick and concise intervention. And I think it really connects to what Deputy Mayor of Tbilisi told us. There were many projects that were ready to be linked to financing, such as the cable car project, and the COVID-19 pandemic has hit cities hard and perhaps brought the clock back a few years. So it's really important that now we leverage as much support as ever to recover from the disasters that have been hitting the world in the last 2 years. Perhaps now moving to Katja Schäfer from UN Habitat, just perhaps since I think a lot of points have been made and shared, just your reactions to what has been said today, and what steps from the perspective of UN Habitat cities can take in this great challenge that lays ahead. Katja.
Thank you very much, Tommaso. And it's actually a great honor to be part of this discussion. I have learned a lot. And in fact, I don't want to repeat what has been said, but maybe identify a few issues that are relevant to the UNECE region that might not have been directly pointed out, but I think they are also in all our minds. As I think COVID-19 has shown us, and the climate crisis that we are facing, including the energy crisis actually that is luring around, there is in fact a lot of, it has been showcased, in fact, that cities have the potential to innovate, to think out of the box, in fact, to come up with approaches that also reach, I think, Priscilla, thank you for highlighting that, reach the municipal budget, in fact, to explore how you can actually fight the battle on the front line, let's say, at local level to address the needs of citizens, of people who have moved into the cities, displaced, and so on. And I think in this spirit also, I think we should embrace the challenges that we face at global level, really at local level. And I think here it is very important that we can't do that alone at city level. It has to be a multi-governance approach, looking at, in fact, national urban policies as well as a territorial dimension. We don't talk only about metropolitan regions who might have more capacities than other cities, but let's talk also about the smaller, let's say, intermediate-sized cities and rural areas that as well face global challenges and can contribute to addressing them. So I think that kind of spirit of solidarity is quite interesting. I think it's also interesting to look at the perspective of the different types of human settlements from an economic perspective, because we don't always have growing, let's say, urbanization, but we have also a region where certain locations are in a more declining or shrinking dynamic. And here, I think the investment in infrastructure and the longer term, let's say, maintenance and payment for that is quite challenging. And I think many of those cities are struggling, even from a municipal revenue collection point of view, to address this and sustain, and in fact, have people staying back home and not migrating to the bigger urban areas. So I think that is maybe a perspective I also would like to bring into this discussion. And then I also feel, and this is a great opportunity today as well, to hear cities talking about their experiences, because I think there is a strong potential in the region to inspire each other. And how have you done this? I like the case of that the deputy mayor of Tbilisi has raised on using infrastructure, let's say mobility as a scheme, to have a more inclusive regeneration program that looks at greening the city, addressing air pollution and the quality of life as a whole. And it was mentioned also by many speakers that this is really a challenge because it's not a straightforward funding case, but it's really an inclusive one that makes it a little bit more complex for urban programming to be supported. But I think with a multi-stakeholder or multi-partner approach and thinking a bit out of the box, I think cities have been able to come about with solutions. And maybe here there's yet again an innovative potential to look at blending of contributions to making such urban regeneration programming happening. And then I think my last point, and it was raised also, is the crisis, the Ukrainian crisis, that is not only within the Ukraine, but many cities in the vicinity are facing. And I do think the upcoming World Urban Forum, which I can here also say has been confirmed for the end of June, will have a strong focus on that dimension. And I feel cities will be there to exchange how they have done certain of those, let's say, climate mitigation adaptation measures in relation to infrastructure in order to help, in fact, to strengthen and build back better cities. As we know, they have not been perfect in the first place, but really having an ambitious goal for the cities that are struggling with fighting basically climate and environmental challenges, as well as, let's say, social and economic challenges that COVID has triggered and, in fact, created impact. I think that is my reflection, Tommaso. I don't know if you all find each other in that, but I hand over to you.
Thanks a lot, Katja. And I think as times are tough, which I think you've expressed very well, cities need to think out of the box. We need to look at different ways on how to deliver on the key priorities. Echoing on this note, I want to invite the last panelist, Raul Garcia Rodriguez from Deloitte. Perhaps some reflections on your end on how cities can think out of the box, what solutions at hand would you suggest in these times? Thanks.
Thank you for having me, and it's an honor to share thoughts with all of you. I have been really interested in everything that I have heard, and I'm going to talk to you not really as a risk advisor from Deloitte, but as a former investor in real estate and developer in urban and land projects. Because what I was facing when I was going to invest in the cities was that I was never sure of what I was doing until a very late moment in the project. I was investing a lot in the preparation of the projects that we have talked today very much, and I think this is great that we will put this in front of the developers, because the developers are actually the first investors in the cities, and it's the investors that you will need to attract. I guess the institutional investors, you know how to attract, but we have to be able to attract those developers that will come to you and will be helping you in developing the very infrastructure that you want. And I think the first thing that I will say is that it's very important that we put together with the private investor, we can put all the public infrastructure that has to be developed around those land plots and sectors of the cities. And for that, we have to make sure that the developers see how much value added it is for them to have a great infrastructure around their projects. This is what brings more investors. And investors want also to make sure that they will have certain guarantees. Not financial guarantees, they do all usually on their own, although it will be great, especially when we come to countries where the banking system is not well developed. But especially when we talk about legal framework guarantees and political guarantees. Why? Because they need licenses. Without licenses, they cannot work. And to get a license that takes months and months, that drains down all their cash flows. So this is one of the activities that the cities should focus on. And in return, what they will get is a big amount of interest from private investors to come and help them develop all those urban infrastructures, all those new settlements, or even to redevelop all settlements at the same time that they develop infrastructure around it. And I think this is a good example of what I was facing from the other side. And yes, a little bit on the sustainability. I think one of the key issues here is to make sure that the investors come with a clear metric and measurement of what they are facing, because that's the only way that they can assess how sustainable their investments are. And this is something that they have to do together with the cities, to be able to measure the KPIs, to be able to measure, and not only the financial KPIs, which they do, but not less than the financial KPIs, because all those projects, in the end, for the private investors, are project finance examples. And they need to make sure that this makes sense in their cash flow as a project investor, or as a project financer. And I think that would be, I don't want to add any more. I think you've talked about all the other issues. I just wanted to bring a little bit of the private overview of how we see the city development. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Raul. And I think you make a very valid point. We often look at this issue from the perspective of cities. It's important to bring the private sector into the conversation, because we have to get everybody on board to be able to leverage multi-stakeholder partnerships and have a chance to close the financing gap. So I'm very happy about this lively discussion that we've had with a lot of great points, and I think it will be on us to digest after this meeting and go forward with all the projects. I want to give just for a very short closing remark to Gulnara Rol, the regional advisor of our division, and from my side, thanks all.
Thank you so much, Tommaso. Thank you so much, Mr. Vice Mayor, dear colleagues. So this is also to give the message of Dmitry Maryasin, of the Deputy Executive Secretary, that UNECE is really very excited that there is such a strong, impactful alliances with the IFIs, with all the organizations and the cities, and that UNECE is really committed to work together. And we are very much interested in being, so UNECE could be used really as this ecosystem and somebody who is really building this enabling environment for the financing and improving quality of life. So also from UNECE side, we're really very grateful for your presentations, for taking time. This meeting will be recorded, so will be available for everybody. So it will be really an excellent opportunity also for anybody else to learn who were not able to make it, because today is the regional forum of sustainable development continues. So many of the colleagues who really wanted to attend simply were not able because they had to be in other meetings, but through recordings, they will be able to do that. So thank you so much.
Yes, fantastic. So we will be in touch with all of you, the community that's working together on this. And at any time, please feel free to reach out. And once again, thanks to Andrea. We'll see each other again in Tbilisi.
Yeah.
Thank you very much all, and yeah, have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good evening to Manila. Bye.
Bye bye.